Hello, you beautiful, sexy people, and welcome to the next episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. If you want to support the show, like if you listen to this show and you love it so much that you feel 10 feet fucking tall when you are finished listening to it, and you feel like you can take on the world, and you feel like you have purpose and confidence and clarity, and emotionally you're stronger. If you feel all those things, or actually, even if you feel none of them, I would really appreciate if you share the show. You can share it on Facebook, all the regular social media. Just click share and let people know about what we're doing here and how it impacted you. Because the more people that hear the show, the more people we can help, and that's why I am up at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday recording this podcast, because it is important. And another thing you can do to support the show is head on over to patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors. And we have some value exchanges there, I would say, and you can support the show and help me cover my costs. And again, build a platform and let more people hear about our message. The creaking you might hear is actually not my back or my knees. It's this crappy chair I'm sitting on that I need to replace. So I want to give you a little window into the behind the scenes going on of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. This conversation is with Kim Muse. You know, one of the cool things about doing a podcast is you get introduced to all kinds of really interesting people that I never would have had the chance to meet otherwise. And Kim is one of those people. So I did my episode with Dr. Kat Smith on overcoming intimacy after trauma, and she introduced me to Kim. And we had a really great conversation. Kim's a couples therapist, and we've talked about so many cool topics like secure attachment and health. Isolation, like the devastating impacts of isolation. What happens when love goes wrong? Like what is the actual process when we go from gazing longingly into each other's eyes every moment of the day till when we kind of can't fucking stand each other? What actually happens there? What are some of the predictable responses to separation distress? Understanding levels of emotional experience, how to re-engage. Like when we get our backs up and there's distance between us, how do we re-engage and sort of soften our positions and that emotional space we're in and come together? And facing fears and coming together, which I think is really important, right? Because there's a lot of fear when it comes to intimacy and relationships and opening up and being vulnerable. And to be able to face those fears really allows you to build a much stronger relationship. So that is what the show is about today. I think you're going to love it. If you're in a relationship or you want to be in a relationship, or quite frankly, if you're in a relationship and you feel like you fucked it all up, this is an episode that will really help you understand some of those dynamics that go on and how to get love back when sometimes it feels like it's gone, and maybe sometimes it feels like it's gone forever. So I want to thank you, Kim, for helping couples in Texas, and now through this podcast, and I'm sure the other ones you've done and will do, helping couples throughout the world. I loved the conversation with you, and I learned a lot, and that's what this is all about. So enjoy the show, guys, and we will see you on the other side.
Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
Hey, Kim, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. When we talked the first time, we had I really enjoyed our dialogue, and I'm looking forward to getting a little deeper into it. So first of all, let me ask you, what does it mean? What does a secure and safe relationship mean?
Well, it means everything. We're finding that, we know a lot about childhood attachment and how important that is to children's ability to develop But what we're just starting to understand is how we also have adult attachment needs that help us progress in our life. So having a safe and secure relationship, and we'll talk about couples today, but this doesn't. This is for any close relationship you have, whether that's a parent, a friend, a child. Having these secure relationships makes a big difference in your ability to in your physical health, in your emotional health, mental health, as well as in your progress as an adult.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I think I think probably only in the last maybe year or two, I've become aware, not in my own life, but just through some of the, the topic of mental health and my own history, just how important that, starting from a childhood, how important attachment is. So can you talk about that? Because I think a lot of people don't understand maybe what it means for a child to, like, what has to happen in order for a child not to feel that sense of attachment or have that sense of attachment. And then, how that can play out in their lives and then impact them when they're adults.
Yeah, so absolutely. We're finding that you have a couple of ways to respond. So if as a child I'm in need of something and I'm calling out for a parent, if they provide that to me, then I feel secure. And I know, and if that is something that is continuous, I know I can count on that person to be there for me. Well, if you think about what that does for somebody, when I need something, I can count on somebody to provide that for me. That's a big deal. If, as a child, when I call out, my needs are not met, and by the way, I think it was back in 1960, psychology thought that children needed to learn how to be independent, that they really didn't need to be coddled. And a lot of work was done to show that actually when a parent responds to a child crying, that provides security. So if a child is not responded to, then they do a couple of things. One of them is they become real anxious, and they'll do whatever it takes to get their caregiver's attention. It's really hard for them to emotionally regulate. Other ways that children respond is they'll just stop sort of having needs. They won't look to their parents for support or help. And then if there's abuse and trauma, there's a couple of different ways that children will respond. They'll respond in fear, but mostly it's I either reach out in anxiety or I avoid trying to get my needs met.
It's really interesting. It's funny when our kids were young, I don't know where we got this idea. I think it was from a pediatrician we listened to, but I mean, we just got convinced that Ferberizing the kids was a good idea. I'm starting to think that maybe was not the best idea. So maybe I'm never going to tell them that though. So maybe I don't want them to hold it against me, but I don't know that if I was to do that all over again, I would do it the same way. So
yeah,
I mean, because you're right. I thought that my belief was it was twofold. Like one, like I need to sleep or I'm going to die, basically, and the other one was it's teaching boundaries and independence. So I don't know. I'm find that really interesting.
Well, and even Jason, you bring up this, but my daughter, and we'll talk about how temperament plays into this too. My daughter is when something is not right, she reaches out in anxiety, and for a long time I thought, well, if you're doing something that is not okay, I'm going to put you in timeout. Mm-hmm. And that would just increase her emotional turmoil. And after kind of learning some things about attachment, when I go into timeout with her and I give her a hug, she settles down. And interestingly enough, now, when something's not going right between the two of us, she will come towards me and want comfort. And I love that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So, why don't we talk about temperament right now? Because I think that's something that, and I don't know if it's the kind of temperament. When I think of temperament, I think of like, and there's probably different categories, but I think of like melancholic and phlegmatic and that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about.
So what I'm talking about as far as temperament is how do you respond to threat?
Okay.
Fight or flight. And part of that is temperament. Part of it is also your attachment background. How were you? So I ask people a number of questions. So when a couple comes into my office, I meet with them together, and I'm assessing a lot of things, not just what they're telling me is going on, but I'm assessing body language, nonverbal cues. I'm looking at a lot of things. But then I do individual attachment background histories with them. And in this, I want to know, how did your family handle emotion? How did you see your parents show affection to one another? How did you see them handle conflict? How did your dad show affection to you? Who did you go to when you were hurting? And how did they handle that? So it's a mixture. It's temperament. If there is a threat, and when I say threat, I mean that very loosely, something's not right. Mm-hmm. Do I get real assertive or aggressive? Or do I back down? Do I withdraw? Do I avoid?
So I'm just thinking, as I'm listening to you, and I'm imagining somebody coming into your office and they're answering these questions with you. I imagine just the process of answering those questions there must be some major light bulbs that go on even before you get into working with them.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting because when I ask people these questions, they get real thoughtful, and often they'll say, I've never really thought about that. I mean, it's not questions that we ask, out to dinner with friends.
Yeah, and I think what I'm learning, and it's through conversations like this with people like you, is just how much. I guess the best way to put it. So I want to do this with some friends, this biography workshop. And the idea behind this biography workshop is that you go through, you break your life into phases, and you go and you really dig deep on these different phases of your life and what ends up happening often as people go through it is they get a much clearer point of view about how the things that happen to them and their beliefs and experiences in their earlier phases of their life are sort of either, impacting the current phase of their life they're in or manifesting themselves in some way. And because I always have this feeling that, I know somehow that a bunch of stuff from my childhood, not that any of it was terrible. I didn't experience trauma or anything like that, but a bunch of stuff from my childhood, sometimes I feel like it's creating this drag in my life and I don't understand quite what it is yet. I'm growing more aware that it's there, but I think so much that people, they don't even have much of a concept, or maybe it's not even something they think about, or maybe they believe that they should just be able to move past it, like, suck it up, gut it out, stuff it down or whatever. And, so I think that's a really interesting exercise to go through with them.
Well, and Jason, to kind of add on to that, some people are really worried, like, well, I shouldn't blame. They don't want to go into the blaming part. And I always say, look, if we're going to start blaming, we're going to go back generations because we're human. And it's not about blame. It's about understanding how you came to be and why you do the things that you do.
So what kind of couples, when they come to see you, what types of issues are they having, or what are some of the things that they're trying to create in their lives, I guess?
Well, so usually when it says, why are you seeking counseling? We've, got paperwork. It's, we're struggling to communicate, or I can't seem to, it seems like my partner doesn't care. We're not able to have fun together. I'm trying to think of some of the others that intimacy, sex. There's a lot of things that basically what it comes down to is we're not in sync.
And so one of the things we talked about at the beginning was, safety and security. And how do those concepts play out in people's lives? Just generally speaking, of course. When they're dealing with some of these issues, like how does, for example, I guess a better way to ask the question is, how does a lack of a sense of safety play out in a relationship, or how can it?
Well, so this is actually really interesting because, and I'll make this very general, just insecure relationships, not insignificant others, but isolation is dangerous. When we don't feel like we have someone that we can count on, we're more likely to have heart attacks. We're twice, our risk for stroke doubles. Relationship distress elevates our cortisol levels and other hormone levels. Conflict, it actually depresses our immune system, so it's harder for us to get over things. And what is especially fascinating to me is rejection or exclusion. It triggers the same brain circuits as physical pain. So if I step on a nail, it's registering in my brain in the same place as if I'm being rejected.
Wow, I think, we did this book club in our Mental Health Warriors group, and it was on the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And basically the premise of what he talks about is kind of, in a way, maybe a slightly different interpretation of what you just said, but he looked at people who come back from like war and why they have such, high levels of post-traumatic stress, or why they have such a hard time integrating in society. And I think the common narrative is that, there was so much adrenaline over there or whatever, and they come back and, nothing can replace that in a normal society. But his contention is that actually it's a devastating sense of isolation, because when you are in that type of extreme environment, you are literally counting on people, for your very existence. And you feel a deep sense of camaraderie and a powerful, about as, base, like primal a bond as you can feel with somebody. When you come back, there's nothing like that in their lives often, and they just struggle with it.
So I had somebody recently speak to this that just said, when I have drinks with somebody, outside of, in the kind of the just get back to normal world, like, what stories are we going to exchange? How am I going to get intimately connected when our experiences are so vastly different? And the things that they're sort of dealing with, stressing over, are so different than what I've experienced during war.
Yeah, for sure. Even though this is a really superficial example of isolation, I am horrible when I'm isolated. Like my wife sometimes, maybe a couple of times a year, will take the kids out of town to go visit her sister. And I always in my head, I think, oh yeah, you know what? I get to like be alone. I get to fart all over the house all day long and whatever. And like literally half an hour after they're gone, I'm a train wreck. I'm like, I'm eating a whole bag of popcorn, and I'm like, I can't stand this. I feel like there's nobody around me. So I can only imagine what it would be like to feel, chronically isolated or disconnected from your partner. I can see how that would be very devastating.
Well, it is. I mean, you come home from work and you think, okay, can I just relax at home? And if you're in a disconnected, or if you're in, if you and your partner are getting in daily or weekly conflict, think about the stress that then you're walking around with all of the time.
Mm-hmm. How is isolation, in your experience, different for men and women? I have this idea in my head of what it might be like, but maybe you could talk about your experience.
So typically, and this is speaking in generalities, people will change. So I have a lot of men, being alone is not as big of a deal. For women, feeling like they don't have somebody they can go to, talk to, etc., it's really hard for them. But that's not always the case. We'll talk about pursue, withdraw patterns. And I have a lot of men, too, that call up and say, we've got to come in. And they're pursuing for closeness, connection. And their wives are the ones that say, I tend to be more of an introvert. I like time to myself. And because of those different needs, they do things differently, and they have a hard time understanding each other.
That is so interesting, because this just actually happened. It was I think it was earlier this week, actually, with me and my wife, where she's more of an introverted person. And it was one of these
like pursue withdraw situations where I wanted I just wanted a hug or something, and she was not in that space. And I was really surprised. It was a really important lesson for me, actually, because she felt extremely intruded on, I think is maybe the best way to put it. And then, I mean,
Yes.
it led to it led to some great conversations and a deeper insight into our relationship. But I felt really quite rejected. And then she felt like by feeling rejected, basically I was being a baby, but also that I was not acknowledging, like somehow I was invalidating the way she felt. Right. So,
Yes. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, so is that a pretty typical example of the pursuit withdrawal pattern?
Yes, but the thing that you say, and this is key here, is you guys were able to have some connecting conversations afterwards that helps you get back on the same page. So we all, and this is important because I think when people come in, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of isolation, even in just we're really struggling in our relationship. And it's good to know that, look, as humans, you cannot have intimacy without being highly sensitive to each other. You're going to step on each other's toes. And what you do with that and how you get out of that is the most important part. So you and your wife then have this soft conversation where you're able to share with each other what your feelings were. When people get stuck in the cycle, they're not able to get to primary emotion. They talk to each other in secondary reactive emotion.
I took this training course to be a facilitator for a peer support group. And one of the things we talked about a lot was emotional dysregulation. And you bring up a really good point, because I didn't really understand this, and I'm sure you see this all the time, but thinking of primary and secondary emotions, so often when people are upset, they can inaccurately express the emotion they're feeling.
Yes.
So, and then what happens is, so I might be, saying that I'm angry with you, but I might be feeling lonely, or I might be feeling rejected, and then what happens is because they're inaccurately presenting that emotion or expressing that emotion, they get an invalidating response from the person they're expressing it to. So they say, somebody might be mad at me when in fact she's feeling lonely or rejected. And I just try to dismiss the fact that why are you even mad about this? This is nothing to be mad about. And it just starts this cycle of, being invalid. I guess my point is being invalidated can be very devastating.
Oh, for sure. And, we'll talk about the role of anger because secondary reactive emotions, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm irritated, I'm annoyed, I'm defensive, all of those things. And if I'm lonely and I'm trying to reach out to my partner, but I'm criticizing, I'm instructing, I'm demanding, anger sets boundaries. Anger protects. And when we are met with anger, we have a tendency to then get into a withdrawal pattern. So if I'm lonely and I'm wanting you close and I use anger, anger inherently pushes people away.
So what is some advice for couples if they are in this situation and say they are met with anger? How do you react in a way that doesn't maybe make the problem worse or make the situation worse?
So, and this is where both people, it's a system, right? So it's not just one person that's creating the problems. Usually those that are trying to reach their partners and they do so in anger, well, it's because their partners aren't real responsive to them. And so what I tell couples are initially, and it takes a while to rewire our brains, but you've got to know each other's moves. And we track this. So when I reach out to you in this way, this is how you respond. And most withdrawers, it's I get defensive or I shut down. I shut you out completely, I won't respond, or I leave. And so the more I push to get to engage with you, the more you shut down. And we're caught in this cycle. And so one of the first things that we do in this counseling, and it's emotion-focused counseling, is what positions are you taking and how those impact your partner.
So can you explain that in more detail? When you say a position, what do you specifically mean by that?
Do I move towards you or do I move away? And some couples will have a situation where they actually switch roles. So one of the things that is common, it's not the rule, but women will pursue for emotional connection. Men typically withdraw from that. It feels uncomfortable. And men will often pursue for physical affection and sex. And if a woman isn't feeling like she's emotionally connected to her partner, she will withdraw from that.
This is very insightful because I'm just thinking about, it's funny how, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how I react. I'm bearing my soul for the benefit of the audience here. So I hope everybody listening appreciates this, or maybe they've already turned it off because I'm bearing my soul. But regardless, it's funny how, and even though sometimes I know what's happening, I still allow it to happen. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I will, sometimes when my wife gets passionate about explaining something, like I feel like she's yelling at me. I know she's not yelling at me. It's just the way she talks and but I think that because of what happened earlier in my life with my first wife, and there was, mental health issues and there was so much anger and all that stuff, that I have this aversion to conflict. Like
Yes.
that. And so I still will sometimes get really defensive about, and then I mean, I'm becoming more aware of this lately, and then what that tells her is that I can't express myself, in the way that when I feel passionate about something, I can't express myself because you basically pout about it, and sorry, go ahead. It's just interesting to me.
Well, so what I was going to say, Jason, you kind of bore your soul, but I'll give you a great example of this. So this same alarm system that tells us whether or not we fight or flight, it also holds emotional memories, and there's no time frame on those. So when my now husband, so we were dating at the time, we had a miscommunication about a night that we were going to be spending time together. And I came home, I got all freshened up, I was excited, and he didn't show up. Well, unknown to him, I had had 2 previous relationships before where they had ended without much notice. And so in this moment when we've got a miscommunication, I can't reach him, all of a sudden I am dealing with not just this situation, but 2 previous other situations. And the intensity of that is hitting me all at once. So when he calls me up, I am quiet. I am pretty rigid in my speaking. And he says, something tells me that I'm in trouble. And as soon as he said that, I break down and I share with him I thought that you didn't want to be with me tonight because of my prior experiences. So what people need to know is we all walk into relationships with previous experiences. We all walk in with raw spots with wounds, and we don't always know what we're touching on. But our brain holds these emotional memories.
You mentioned earlier in this conversation, you mentioned the idea of intimacy. And I think it's an important topic to explore in a little more detail because I know how a lot of guys think of intimacy, but when you say intimacy, what specifically do you mean? And how much of, when you see people, how much is a different understanding of intimacy, contributing to whatever issues they're facing when they come in to see you?
So, I mean, it's a big deal with intimacy. So when I say intimacy, I'm talking about how often do you share what you're going through. It's surprising to me at the end of the day how little sometimes people just even communicate about their days. So that's real surface of just how is your day today, but then it's the emotion of maybe I was struggling with this, or I'm reacting to you in this way and I'm not sure why. So that's another level of intimacy. Can I talk to you about how I'm feeling in this present moment? The other is, how do I express affection to you? Do we hold hands? Which touch, I mean, I could go off on how powerful touch is. Do we cuddle? Do we hug each other? Do we kiss? And can we talk about sex, what our needs are, what we like? It's really just this overarching, are you there for me? Do you respect me? There's so many levels to intimacy.
So let's talk about the importance of touch.
Yeah, so if you've had somebody talk about this on this podcast, you could stop me, although I'm sure there's different people maybe showing up. But they did a study, and I don't remember when, and I'll talk about that study and then one they just recently did, where a woman was put in an MRI machine and she was told that her ankles would be periodically shocked. And so she's in there, and, if you think about your ankles being shocked, you're probably a little nervous what it's going to feel like. And the lights in her brain of kind of concern go on. Well, she gets shocked and she rates her pain, and it's pretty painful. Then she has a nurse or somebody that she doesn't know comes in and holds her hands. And it's a little better, not much. Then she has somebody that she loves, that she feels secure with, come in and hold her hand. And it's mildly irritating, the shock. So it really takes the pain away. And what's fascinating is then you put that partner that's holding his spouse's or hand in a brain scan. And if you put up their brain scans next to each other, you would not be able to tell who is getting the shock and who is feeling for their partner. So in this way, we actually absorb the other person into the self.
Wow.
If that makes sense. So you're actually becoming one physiologically.
Wow, that is a really... I had no idea that was the case. So, and when a relationship starts to experience, when there starts to be a disconnect of some sort, is touch often one of the first things that goes away?
Not always.
No?
No, some people can come in and say, this has been an area that we feel we both connect. And I think it's just what meaning you put to physical intimacy. If a woman perceives, so I'm just going to say, and it's not always the man that is pursuing, but often it is. If a man is pursuing for physical affection and sex, and a woman feels like her emotional needs aren't met, she may think he's just using me for the release. Mm-hmm. If she feels and knows that and can have a voice in sex and enjoys that, then that's a place where they can connect. So it's not always, but often, yes, when the emotional relationship is not going well, the physical relationship follows.
This question is just something that popped into my head, but how does porn impact people's relationships in your experience?
That is a really complicated question that you're
I'm sure it is.
asking, Jason. It really just depends on a couple. Well, it depends. There's so many variables to this. First of all, when people talk about porn, is it an addiction? How do both people feel about it? And I think that's one of the biggest things is for some women, that is a violation, or men, it's a violation of their intimacy together. It feels like cheating. For others, it's not a violation. So it really depends on the couple.
Okay. So when love starts to go wrong, I mean, what happens?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. It's important to understand and organize the negative patterns of communication. People don't understand they're making predictable moves. And it can seem so disorganized because the context, the behavior is all over the place. It could be, I had a situation where it was over what cereal do you want? Another where what restaurant do you want to go to? It could be over putting away Christmas decorations. And so it seems like there are all these different isolated events, but there's when you look at it through an attachment lens, it starts to make a lot of sense that there's a cycle that's happening. And some couples will come in and recognize we keep getting into this thing, but they don't know how to get out. And what it really is people become victims of the cycle, of their coping mechanisms, of their secondary reactive emotion. So if you don't mind, I can go into kind of the 3 basic patterns that people get caught in.
Please do.
So the first one is attack. It's sort of like who's to blame for what we're currently experiencing. Find the bad guy, bad gal. And it's a dead end. It's easy to see and feel what you just did to me. It's much harder to see the impact of my response or how I reach out to you. So it's mutual blame for the distressed relationship, and it's a dead end. The more you attack, the more dangerous you appear. The more I watch my back, and the harder I hit back. And kind of round we go. And the secret to stopping this is recognizing that no one has to be the bad guy and getting to those primary feelings. But you have to realize what you're doing. That usually, the attack cycle, it doesn't last usually long term. The most common one is that pursue, withdraw. So demand, withdraw, criticize, defend. One person steps forward, the other person steps back. And it's a disconnection protest. Both are trying to protect themselves and the relationship in different ways. So one partner is saying, where are you? I'm trying to reach you. I need you to be here for me. I need to know you care. They're not saying it like that. Mm-hmm. The other is withdrawing, quietly protesting the implied criticism or instruction or demand, and they're also trying to keep the peace. They'll say, I don't want to get into a fight. And so they're both trying to protect the relationship, but what they don't realize is they're scaring the heck out of each other in the ways that they're doing this. So when I'm I don't want to get in a fight, it looks to you like I don't care. Mm-hmm. When you're trying to engage me, it looks like you're mad. It looks like you're disappointed. It looks like I can't please you. So needs are hidden under very unclear signals. and couples get stuck in these real rigid patterns of how they try to deal with that. The last one is a withdraw pattern, where it's two people who are just kind of strangers. They're living parallel lives. And usually this, by the way, is the most dangerous pattern that couples can get into. And John Gottman talks about stonewalling. And this is where nobody's reaching. Nobody is trying to connect. And it's completely isolating. Usually this pattern happens after a pursuer, after how many years, just says, I'm done. This isn't working. And they just sort of give up and accept that their needs aren't going to be met. So those are the three kind of basic, and everybody's unique, so there's variations to those.
Can the attack pattern... Oh, I just heard my echo there myself. Wow, that sounds... Okay, I think it's good now. Can the attack pattern take the role... Or can somebody attack by doing things like, I guess, different forms of invalidation? Like, so I'm thinking of somebody attacks, they're really upset about something, and the other person, minimizes what they're saying. Is that a form of attack?
Which part?
So, I attack you because you, did something that really pissed me off. And I respond by saying, you know what? Why is it such a big deal? Why do you make such, it's just this one thing and you're blowing it totally out of proportion. Like, is that a form of attack?
Yes.
Okay.
So when the blame is, it's like who's to blame? I hear another form of that is, well, you just expect too much. Or you're always looking for a problem, something to be upset about. You've got anger issues. So it can come out in a lot of different ways.
So what are the different levels of emotional experience?
So this is perfect because this goes right into couples need to know what positions they're taking, and then they need to know the different levels of emotional engagement. And the only solution to getting in sync with each other that I'm aware of is tuning into the right emotion. So when people hear I'm an emotion-focused therapist, it evokes a lot of different responses, including fear about what therapy is going to look like. Especially for those that, we hear emotions get in the way of making rational decisions. Or you hear you're too emotional or irrational. Take your emotion out of it. You need to be logical here. And for a lot of years, psychology has really emphasized thinking over feeling. And the field of neuroscience is pointing to a different reality. And that is where our emotional processing is central and rapid, and actually it sets the stage for our slower process of thinking. So what that means is you actually feel before you think. And I give people the example of the other day I was cleaning my playroom, and I moved a ball, and I see this thing just jet out. And I jump back. And before I jump back, or after I jump back, I realize I don't even know why I'm jumping back. It was a lizard. Mm-hmm. But my body is responding to something running across my wall right by my hand before I'm even aware of what that is. And so what neuroscience has done is tracked our response to situations and found that our emotions actually fire 2.5 times more rapidly than our thoughts. So that's not to say that our thoughts aren't important. What I am saying is that it's important to be able to tune into both to make healthy, informed decisions. We've been taught to overthink and underfeel. So let's talk about primary emotion. This is your gut felt emotion stemming from the immediate situation or stimuli. You may feel it as like a knot in your stomach, a heaviness in your chest, a pressure, tenseness in your shoulders. But it's actually a physical sensation. And when I ask people, where do you feel that? Again, I don't think we ask that question very often. And so they'll say, what do you mean? Where do I feel that? But when we feel loved, there's warmth associated in different parts of our body. It's the same with more difficult emotion. And so our primary emotion is, where do I feel hurt? Where do I feel lonely? So your primary emotions are soft and vulnerable. And for a lot of people, when they first come in, it's hard to locate the physical sensation. It's also hard to locate their vulnerable emotion because they're so used to saying, I'm frustrated, I'm upset, all those secondary reactive emotions. And we dismiss our primary emotion. We distract ourselves. If we're feeling a certain way, it doesn't feel good, we get busy. We try to change how we're looking at the situation, our attitude. We try to cheer ourselves up. For some, they've learned to numb out. And that can be through a lot of things. That's addiction comes into play there. Also, one of the more common things is we dismiss primary emotion by getting angry and looking for someone to blame. This is one of the most common ones. And if a partner comes and says, let's just take they're having a problem at work, and they'll come, and often this is women, we like to vent. We like to just talk through things. But maybe this is a certain situation that has come up multiple times. So they'll say, gosh, this person was just really hard on me today. And the gut feeling for their spouse may be a twisting in the stomach, and their response will be anger. You've talked to me a million times about this, and I try to help, but you won't listen, so why are you coming to me now? Well, when you really get into the primary emotion of it is often, I don't know what to say here or how to help you because you keep coming, and I don't know what else to do, or I feel like you don't value my opinion. So these are ways that primary emotions are so important, and yet they're rarely expressed.
How important is it to, when you are feeling one of these emotions, and say it's initiated by something your partner said to you, how important is it to let yourself just be in that space and feel those emotions?
So it is so important. And this is where I love that we're starting to understand more about mindfulness. In that if you try to dismiss it, then you're going to miss the information that it has. I mean, it's your internal GPS system. And if you tune into anger, then that's going to guide you in a certain direction. So anger is both primary and secondary. We can talk about how that is different. But if I'm trying to pull you close and I'm doing so with anger, I'm going to push you away. If I am trying to please you, if I want to be good enough for you, but I get defensive when you tell me I'm not doing something right, that's not going to be effective for how badly I want to be there for you. It's sending completely different messages.
I was
Did
talking
I answer
to
your
this
question, Jason?
Well, I think so, but let me give you an example of what I was talking to a coaching client yesterday. And so he has ex-wife. So they're divorced and they have a pretty acrimonious relationship. But I mean, keeping in mind, this is one side of the story, but regardless, let's say this is true.
Right.
She says a lot of incredibly hurtful things to him. And what he does is he doesn't allow himself to actually feel the emotion, and feeling hurt when somebody says something horrible to you it seems to me would be a pretty natural response. So what he does though, is he believes that if he was a stronger guy, that stuff should be like water off a duck's back to him. So then what he does is he creates this belief that, I need to not react at all, and it needs to not hurt. And then when it does hurt, then he doubles down on it by beating himself up and judging himself about the fact that it actually hurts, instead of just understanding that it's okay that hurts and just to be in that space with it. You know what I mean? So he creates this downward spiral where he's judging himself for feeling a normal human emotion. So is that a common thing you see, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure. And especially, I would say, I work with a lot of first responders, as well as I've had a number of military individuals, and they're supposed to be tough, right? Mm-hmm. And they are. They encounter things that I can't imagine encountering and what that would be like. But it's this person, and our Western culture has really done a disservice here, where we think we should be independent. I see quotes on Pinterest all the time that talk about how I can be strong no matter what you say to me because I have enough self-confidence. Well, the truth is, what others say to us, it has an impact. We need other people. I mean, the health benefits of having a secure relationship. A Harvard study in 2010 talked about that it is every bit as important as diet, as exercise, as adequate sleep, as not smoking. So to say I don't need a relationship, or I shouldn't respond to somebody saying hurtful things, is to say you shouldn't be human.
I love that. So when people, let's say they've grown apart, they've become disconnected, their positions are possibly starting to become polarized. How can they re-engage and soften and come back together, or just start to re-engage, I guess, and soften their positions?
Yeah. So this is where, there's a couple key things that in therapy we do that are really important. So the first is, and a lot of these are happening all at once. Sometimes it can kind of happen one at a time, but usually it's all at once. I'm assessing for what pattern are they stuck in, and then I start to access some softer emotion. And it's really interesting because when people get to vulnerable emotions, so when people come into my office, I don't have a very big couch, but they typically sit, and depending on where they're at and how much this has taken hold of their relationship, but they sit as far away as possible, and very rarely are they looking at each other. They're staring straight forward, and when somebody can access a softer emotion, usually, and not always, but a lot of the time, the other partner that's listening will look over. And when I hear somebody go into primary language that has a lot of attachment implications, and people hate this at first, but we do what's called enactments. And usually they're looking at me as they're talking about these softer emotions. And I say, you know what, I feel really connected to you right now, but that's not why you came to therapy. Can you look at your partner and share this with them? And they can always say, I don't feel safe enough to do this. And I respect that. And I want them to be honest with me. But when they look at their partner and they share these things, I mean, we slow this process down to like a snail's speed. after they share it, I ask them, what does it feel like to share that with this person? And some people will say, well, it feels really scary. It feels weird. It feels awkward. I'm worried about how they're going to respond. And then I turn to the other partner and I say, what is it like to hear your spouse say that underneath criticism or withdraw, this is what's really going on? And oftentimes the response is, I had no idea. And it makes me feel really bad. So these are events where it's not just, okay, so go home and work on this pursue, withdraw pattern. It is in therapy, having an experience. And I kind of talk to people. It's like, if you've ever read a book and the book just pulled you in, you had this real emotional connection to it, and you go to the movie and the storyline is great, but there's no chemistry, there's no emotion, it falls flat. Well, that's kind of how counseling can be too, where you come in, you talk about the issues, but you leave emotion out of it. So with primary emotion, it's not just saying, I'm feeling lonely. It's actually sitting in how that feels and getting that emotion alive in the room.
Wow. That must be, I can see how that would be highly uncomfortable for people when they first start doing it.
Yeah, so I will say this, Jason, so that people aren't like, oh my goodness, that must be terrifying. First of all, it is, but we do it real slow. Mm-hmm. This is not something when they first come in, I'm asking them to do these things. When they first come in, I'm watching their body language. I'm seeing how accessible they are. I'm seeing how responsive they are. I'm seeing how quickly conversations can escalate. So this is after I've met with them a couple times. And I can kind of sense what's going to happen.
So what types of fears do people have to face before they can come together? So, I mean, obviously the as you said, you work at a snail's pace, and the fear of sort of living in the emotion is something you help them overcome. But what other fears do they have to face before they can actually come back together?
So, yeah, they get to a place where when they're able to talk from a kind of primary emotions, they're able to get out of the cycle. So we all get into it. It's knowing how to get out. And they're functioning. It's not creating as much damage. Then we go into stage 2 of our work. And that is going into deep fears about, it may be the relationship. It may be about the self. And fear and longing are two sides of the same coin. So some of the fears that people have, I heard from one person, I'm worried that I'm going to stay in this relationship and my life, no one's going to witness my life. I'm invincible. Or I'm invisible. I'm worried that I'm not lovable. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough. There's lots of really deep fears that people have that when they're able to express that to their partner, it pulls them in. So there's this natural sort of pull that when people are able to get softer with each other and they've experienced that, going into those fears, they're able to really engage with each other about why they do what they do. And often it's based on these fears.
So why is doing this work so important to you?
Well, I think I worked in an agency for about 8 years and decided to go out on my own. And I wanted to specialize in something, and couples counseling was something that both fascinated me and was just absolutely bewildering. It's so complex, and so I thought, I want to. I had a little exposure to this model, but it seemed so complicated that I wanted some more. So when I went, and the first kind of phase is you do a 4-day training. I fell in love with it for me. This is important to do this. Like, I love doing this for people because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all have experiences. We have things that we're proud of. We have strengths that we enjoy. We have weaknesses. We have behaviors that we're not proud of. And I don't know anybody that doesn't want to be understood, that doesn't want to be loved, that doesn't want some kindness when we're struggling. And so to offer that to myself, to offer that to others, it's truly where, for me, it's a spiritual experience. It's where I find my connection in the universe.
I love it. So, I mean, we've talked about so many interesting things here. I mean, we've talked about, secure and safe relationships, the isolation, emotional experience, how to understand each other, different patterns. I mean, it's awesome. It was just a wonderful conversation. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like the audience to know?
I think the only thing that a couple of things. The first is part of when you go into the fears, part of talking about those is re-engaging with yourself. So this is not just when people come in, it's not just, hey, here's a set of things that you need to be doing together. While going on dates is great, that's not what it is, but it's really getting to know the self and engaging with who you are and what you need so that you can be able to access that, ask for it explicitly. And for those that tend to withdraw, it's understanding that they have a need for connection. It's important that they re-engage with that part of, gosh, it's really nice to be able to go to somebody and talk about things. So this process is not just for relational purposes. That's why people come in. But it's really to engage with the self, knowing who you are, where you come from, and what you need to be soothed. And I think one of the things, too, what people think meeting the other's needs just feels overwhelming. But one of the things that I learned from some of my trauma training is most of us, what we need when our brain is threatened is what you would offer to a child. It is being held. It is being told it's going to be okay. It's being told I'm here with you. It's those things. It's not some grand gesture. It's small things of just we're together and there's comfort here. There's safety here. There's security here.
That's a great place to end it. I've just become, I think more and more, and it's conversations like this that help drive the point home and give me different insights, but human connection is the antidote to so much of what ails us. And I'm just so happy that through doing this podcast, I get to connect with people like you who also not only share that belief, but also are working actively to help create more human connection. So on behalf of me and all my fellow humans, thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And, Jason, I think I've done a lot of, I've listened to your podcasts. The work you are doing is amazing. And I think you're giving a safe place for men to go where they're able to talk about these things. And I mean, it's so isolating. And so you're providing a place that is just so needed. And I love it.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that.
So thank you as well.
Yeah, nothing like a mutual little love session here to end this podcast.
That's right.
It's wonderful. So for
a lot of primary emotion.
Nice. So for our guests our audience who want to find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do that? And we'll include all the links and anything else you want in the show notes page. So it'll always be there for people to reference and access easily.
Yeah, so, I work for a group practice called the Couple Zone. If you go to couplezonedallas.com, you can see kind of our information. If you want to get in touch with me personally, my email is Kim at, what is my email address? I'm blanking here. It's Kim at couplezonedallas.com.
All right. Anything else?
The other thing I would say, there's a lot of great books. If people find that maybe they are hesitant to go into counseling, and I'll get to this in a second, or their partners are, there's some really good books out there. Dr. Sue Johnson, who co-developed this model with Dr. Les Greenberg, she has written a book called Hold Me Tight. And that's a great resource. Dr. Bradley, who is the president of my group practice, he's written a book called Emotionally Focused Couple Therapy for Dummies. Both of those have chapters and activities that couples do together that can be really helpful. And if you're looking for a therapist, there is an international site. It's called ICEFT. So that's ICEEFT.com. And it's actually out of Canada. So it's in Ottawa. And people can go there to find a therapist near their area that uses this treatment approach.
Wonderful. Well, Kim, thank you so much for being on the Mental Health Warriors podcast. And I really, really had a great time talking to you.
Jason, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
All right. Take care.
You too.
And boom, there you have it. Thanks, Kim, for a great conversation. And for everybody that listened, you listened to me. If you still think you have all these excuses not to have, more intimacy and a closer relationship in your life, it's all your fault. We're giving you the tools. You need to take those tools out of your tool belt and put them into action and build some cool shit, like an awesome relationship with the people that you care about most. But it's not always easy. Trust me, I know. But it is a super worthwhile, because when you have someone that's close to you, who you are close with, who you can talk to about anything, who you can share your fears with and your dreams and your hopes and get called on your bullshit in a way that's loving and supportive, even though it might not feel like that at the time, that is what gives us strength. Having those kind of relationships in our life raises us up. It gives us strength. It gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us support. It gives us a set of, perspective that allows us to see our blind spots, which are really difficult for us to do on our own, right? So there's so much to be said for actively working to create a wonderful relationship. And I hope the set of tools and the knowledge that you got out of this podcast will help you do just that. So I'd love to hear about how you are deepening your relationship and getting back to the lovingly staring each other's eyes all fucking day long, even when there's all this other shit to do, but you can't stop it because you're so in love with each other and you want to look into each other's souls. That's what you can get out of this podcast by implementing the tools that Kim talks about. So I'm going to end this episode like I end every single episode, and that's by saying, and note I said saying this time, I'm not going to sing it. I really don't feel good about singing it in the last episode. But regardless, if you have struggled, I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, fuck, man, I am not going to judge you, okay? I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear you. And I'm going to validate your emotional experience. And if you want my opinion, I will offer it to you, or maybe a different point of view, but I will not judge you. And I encourage you to give that gift to someone else, because it could change their life, and it will undoubtedly change yours, because you will realize how fucking powerful you actually are. And it is immensely powerful. And I love seeing people unleash that power in the service of other people. So I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will see you next time. And help somebody. Just help somebody today. It feels really fucking good. Okay? Bye, guys.